She grabbed my son's arm right as the school bus doors closed and yelled, "Your dad thinks rules don't apply to him." I was still across the street, coffee in hand, when every kid went silent. Terrence stared. My son froze. Karen leaned in close to his face like she owned him. I dropped the cup and walked faster, but she didn't stop. She waved a clipboard and snapped, "Tell your father he's banned from this neighborhood." I didn't say a word yet. I watched her smile like she had already won. She pushed a paper toward my kid and told him to sign his name. A child, 8 years old. I heard her whisper, "If you don't, I'll make sure your family is gone." I stepped between them and calmly said, "Let go of him." She laughed and said, "This is HOA business. You people never learn." She pointed at my chest and added, "You're trespassing every morning." I looked around at the public bus stop. The city sign, the cameras on the pole. I stayed quiet. She hates that. Karen's always do. She pulled out her phone and dialed fast. "Police," she said loud enough for everyone. "There's an aggressive man harassing a minor and blocking the bus." Parents gasped. My son started to cry. I put my arm around him and felt my jaw tighten. She smirked and said, "Don't run. They'll be here in 2 minutes." I told my son to stand behind me and breathe. He did. He trusts me. That's the part she didn't understand. A white SUV rolled up with magnetic decals that said, "Community Patrol." 2 guys jumped out, wearing cheap badges. One shouted, "Hands where we can see them." Karen clapped like it was a show. She told the crowd, "See, this is what happens when you ignore HOA rules." One of the fake cops tried to grab my arm. I didn't move. I said softly, "This isn't how this ends." He sneered and told me to shut up. They tried to cuff me in front of my son. Karen leaned close and whispered, "I warned you." My son yelled my name. I knelt down, looked him in the eye, and said, "Hey buddy, remember what I told you? Cameras tell the truth." He nodded. Karen rolled her eyes and told the fake cops to hurry up before the bus came back around. She wanted this fast. Dirty things always want speed. A real patrol car pulled in behind them. Lights off. The officer stepped out slow and looked at the scene. Karen rushed over and started talking fast, pointing at me, pointing at my kid, pointing at the papers. The officer asked for IDs. The fake cops hesitated. I finally spoke, calm and clear, "Officer, this woman grabbed my child. There's video." Karen snapped back, "He's lying. Arrest him now." The officer looked at me and paused. He recognized me. His face changed. He asked Karen to step back. She refused. She said, "Do you know who I am?" The officer said, "Yes. Someone who needs to let go of that clipboard." The fake cops tried to slip away. Another patrol car arrived. Then another. Terrence started recording. Karen's smile cracked. She kept saying, "This is HOA authority," like it was a magic word. The officer walked up to me and said quietly, "Morning, Chief." Karen heard it. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. My son looked up at me, surprised. I squeezed his shoulder and said, "You're safe." Karen stuttered. "Chief of what?" The officer answered, "Police." The crowd murmured. Phones went higher. Karen's face went pale. I turned to her and said the line she remembered forever. "You should have kept your hands off my kid." Karen stepped back like the ground moved under her feet. "That's not possible," she said, shaking her head. "He parks a pickup truck." "Chiefs don't drive that." The parents started whispering. One of the real officers was already talking to the 2 fake community patrol guys. They couldn't even say which department they worked for. One of them tried to peel off the magnetic decal from the SUV door like that would fix it. I stayed calm. I always do. I looked at my son and said, "Go stand by Mrs. Carter." She nodded and pulled him close. Karen pointed at me again, but her finger was shaking now. "He threatened me," she yelled. "He said this isn't how it ends." The officer looked at her and said, "Ma'am, that's not a threat." She tried again. "He's been violating HOA parking rules for weeks. I have notices." She waved the paper in the air like it was a warrant signed by God. The officer took the paper from her hand. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened. "This isn't an official HOA document," he said. "There's no board signature, no registration number." Karen snapped, "I am the board." A parent behind her muttered, "That explains a lot." A few people laughed. Karen spun around and screamed, "Stop recording." One of the fake cops finally spoke up, "Sir, She hired us for enforcement. The officer raised an eyebrow. You're impersonating law enforcement. The guy stuttered. No. We're security. The second patrol officer opened the SUV door and found plastic zip cuffs in a box. Cheap ones. Karen's face went white again. She tried to switch the story. He's been harassing the neighborhood. Loud music. Suspicious visitors. I looked at her and said quietly, I work night shifts. The officer nodded. Yes, he does. Karen blinked fast. She didn't like facts. Then the twist hit her harder. The officer turned his body cam toward her and said, We also received a call last night. Someone reported a child at this address being left alone and possibly abused. The crowd gasped. My son's name was on that report. Karen's lips parted slowly. She didn't know I already knew. I looked at her and said, You called child services on my family. She tried to speak, but nothing came out at first. Then she whispered, I was protecting the neighborhood. I took one step closer, not angry, just steady, by targeting an 8-year-old. Mrs. Carter spoke up. He's with his father every morning. Another dad added. We all see them. Phones kept recording. Karen realized she wasn't controlling the crowd anymore. She was losing it. The first officer turned to her. Ma'am, filing a false report is a crime. She laughed nervously. It wasn't false. I had a feeling, he replied. Feelings don't replace evidence. One of the fake cops tried to quietly slide into the driver's seat of their SUV. A patrol officer blocked the door. Keys. The guy handed them over without arguing. The second fake officer looked at Karen like she had just ruined his life. She avoided his eyes. Karen made one last move. She pointed at me and shouted, You can't arrest me. I run this community. That's what Ashley pulled my badge from inside my jacket. Not to show off, just to end the lie. The metal caught the sunlight. I don't run this community, I said calmly, but I protect it. The officer looked at her and said, Mom, turn around. And this time, she didn't argue. The click of the cuffs was loud. Not because of the metal, but because of the silence around it. Karen's shoulders stiffened as the officer read her rights. Just 10 minutes ago she was shouting orders at everyone. Now she couldn't even look up. But she wasn't done. This is harassment, she screamed. He planned this. He used his position. She tried to twist her wrists like the cuffs were fake too. The officer holding her stayed calm. Ma'am, you hired 2 men impersonating law enforcement. You filed a false child endangerment report. And you physically grabbed a minor. He paused. That's not HOA business. Terrence began talking all at once. Someone said, She threatened my dog last month. Another added, She put a boot on my car. Phones were still recording. Karen realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. The fake patrol SUV was being searched. One officer pulled out a folder from the passenger seat. Inside were dozens of printed violation notices, all signed by Karen. No board stamp. No legal registration. Just her name in bold at the bottom like she was mayor of the block. Then another twist dropped. An older man pushed through the crowd. Gray hair, calm face. I recognized him immediately. Mr. Alvarez, the real HOA president. He held up his own folder. I've been trying to find out who's been sending fake letters under our name, he said loudly. He looked straight at Karen. Now I know. Karen's eyes widened. You're retired, she snapped. You don't even attend meetings. He didn't raise his voice. Because there haven't been meetings. You canceled them. The crowd reacted. Someone whispered, She's been acting alone. Mr. Alvarez handed the officer official documents. She hasn't been on the board for 6 months. We voted her out. A mom near the curb gasped. Then how has she been finding people? Karen's breathing got heavier. She looked at me like I had set this up. I hadn't. I just waited. Truth has its own timing. The officer turned back to her. Impersonating HOA authority. Impersonating law enforcement by proxy. Filing false reports. Harassment of a minor. He shook his head slightly. This keeps getting worse. Karen suddenly pointed at me again. He threatened me before. He said cameras tell the truth. Her voice cracked. I answered calmly, They do. I nodded toward the traffic pole across the street. City camera. Working. Always working. One of the officers was already on the radio requesting footage. Mrs. Carter stepped forward too. I have doorbell video from across the street. She grabbed his arm first. Karen looked around. But nobody was standing with her anymore. Even the two fake patrol guys were now sitting on the curb in cuffs. My son slowly walked toward me. I knelt down again. He asked in a quiet voice, "Are we in trouble?" I shook my head. "No, buddy. We don't get in trouble for telling the truth." Karen heard that, and for the first time, she looked small. As they guided her toward the patrol car, she turned one last time and shouted, "This isn't over. I have connections." The officer opened the back door and replied, "So do we." The door shut, but right before the car pulled away, dispatch came over the radio again. "Unit 12, be advised. We've just connected the suspect to 3 additional fraudulent complaints filed under different names." The officer looked at me. This morning wasn't random. This had been planned. And Karen had been doing this to more families than just mine. The patrol car hadn't even turned the corner when another unit pulled up fast. The officer stepped out holding a tablet. "Chief, you need to see this." He turned the screen toward me. Same handwriting. Same fake HOA header. Different names. 3 families had received eviction-style notices in the past month. All single parents, all newer to the neighborhood. Karen wasn't targeting rules. She was targeting people. Mrs. Carter covered her mouth. "That's the Johnson family," she whispered, pointing at one name. "She scared them into selling," a dad behind me added. "And the Parkers moved out overnight." My jaw tightened. This wasn't about parking anymore. It never was. One of the officers opened Karen's patrol car door again. "Ma'am, we need access to your phone," she snapped. "You need a warrant." He replied calmly, "We're getting one." She leaned back in the seat, trying to look confident again, but sweat was forming on her forehead. Then the biggest shift happened. Mr. Alvarez stepped beside me and said quietly, "Chief, there's more." He handed me another document. It was a property map. Red circles drawn around 5 houses. Mine included. I recognized the handwriting instantly. "Karen's. These are the homes near the empty lot," he said. "The developer wants that land." I looked up slowly. The empty lot at the end of the street had been sitting untouched for years. Rumors said someone wanted to build luxury townhouses there. Higher HOA fees. Higher property value. The kind of project that pushes people out quietly. And suddenly, it made sense. Single parents, immigrant families, veterans on fixed income, people less likely to fight back. Karen wasn't just power-hungry, she was clearing space. The officer beside me muttered, "We just found large deposits in her account over the last 4 months." I didn't react. I didn't need to. The story was writing itself now. Karen saw us talking. She started yelling from inside the car, "They're lying. I volunteer for this neighborhood." But her voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. Parents weren't scared now. They were angry. Mrs. Carter stepped forward and said loudly, "You tried to scare a child this morning." That line hit harder than anything else. The fake patrol SUV was being towed. The 2 hired guys were now talking. Fast. One of them said, "She told us it was legal." Said she had city approval. The officer replied, "Did you ever verify that?" Silence. I walked toward the patrol car one last time. Karen glared at me through the window. "You think you've won?" she hissed. I looked at her calmly and said, "This was never about winning." She leaned closer to the glass. "You have no idea who you're messing with." I held her stare and answered with the line everyone recording would replay later. "You picked the wrong block. And the wrong kid." Just then, dispatch came through again. "Chief, be advised. Internal Affairs is requesting a full financial investigation. The developer tied to the vacant lot has prior fraud allegations in 2 counties. Mr. Alvarez looked at me. "So it's bigger than her?" "Yad. Much bigger." The bus came back around to drop off a forgotten backpack. My son grabbed it quietly. The driver looked shaken. Parents were still standing there, not leaving. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Karen's phone started ringing inside the evidence bag on the officer's hood. Caller ID. Davenport Holdings, the name of the development company. The officer looked at me and raised an eyebrow. Karen closed her eyes. This morning wasn't just about a bus stop anymore. It was about a whole neighborhood someone thought they could quietly erase. The officer didn't answer the phone. He just let it ring. Every buzz felt loud. Terrence leaned in. Someone whispered, "That's the developer." Karen kept her eyes shut like if she didn't see it. It wouldn't be real. The call stopped, then started again. Same name. Davenport Holdings. The officer finally answered and put it on speaker. A smooth voice came through. "This is Mr. Davenport. I need to speak to Karen." Immediately, the officer replied, "She's unavailable. You're speaking to law enforcement." Silence for half a second. Then the voice changed. "There must be a mistake." I stepped closer and said calmly, "No, there isn't." The voice asked, "And who are you?" I answered, "The person your employee grabbed a child in front of a school bus." Another pause. Then the line went dead. No goodbye, no apology, just a click. That click told us everything. An officer checked the time and said, "We're securing warrants." Another started making calls. Karen opened her eyes now. Panic had replaced anger. She shouted, "I was following instructions." The officer leaned in. "From who?" She looked away. That was answer enough. Mr. Alvarez spoke to the crowd. "Anyone who received letters or fines, please stay. This matters." People nodded. A few stepped forward with their phones already open. One woman said, "She told us our house was unsafe." A man added, "She said we had 10 days to leave." Every sentence added weight to the cuffs, already on Karen's wrists. My son tugged my sleeve. "Dad, is the bus coming again?" I knelt then said softly, "Soon." He looked at Karen and asked, "Why was she mad at us?" I didn't answer her way. I answered the right way, because some people confuse control with power. He nodded like he understood more than I expected. Another patrol car arrived, then a city inspector. This scene wasn't shrinking, it was growing. Karen saw that and started crying, loud and sharp. "I just wanted order," she yelled. A mom shot back, "You wanted fear." The officer read out the new charges: fraud, conspiracy, false reporting, child endangerment. Each word hit like a step backward for her. When he finished, he looked at me and said quietly, "Chief, this is going to shake the city." I answered, "Good." As they moved Karen to a different vehicle, she twisted around and screamed my name. "You ruined my life." I met her eyes one last time and said the line that would follow her everywhere. "You did that the moment you touched my child." The engine started. Parents finally began to breathe again. Some hugged their kids. Some wiped their eyes. The bus pulled in for real this time. But I didn't leave, because I knew one thing for sure. This story wasn't done yet. The bus doors opened and kids climbed on, but most parents stayed. Nobody wanted to go home like nothing happened. A city sedan pulled up next. No lights, just authority. Two people stepped out with badges I didn't recognize right away. One of them nodded at me. "Chief, we're from the DA's office." That landed heavy. They asked who had video. Hands went up everywhere. Doorbells, dash cams, phones. Mom said she had audio from last week when Karen threatened fines. Another dad said his Ring camera caught the fake patrol car driving by at night. The DA's investigator smiled thinly. "Good. Very good." Karen was moved again, this time to an unmarked car. She was quieter now. No yelling, no speeches, just staring at the ground. One of the fake patrol guys finally broke and said loud, "Enough for everyone." She paid cash, told us to scare people. The investigator turned fast. "Who told her?" He swallowed. "A guy from Davenport. Said it was time sensitive." The investigator wrote it down and said, "It always is." Mr. Alvarez leaned toward me and whispered, "They tried to buy my silence last year." I looked at him. He nodded. I said no. That was another puzzle piece sliding into place. This wasn't a bad morning. It was a bad plan finally exposed. The DA's office asked me to walk the block with them. We stopped at the empty lot. Fresh survey stakes were already in the ground. No permit posted. No notice to residents. One investigator took photos and said, "They were moving early." I said, "They usually do when they think no one's watching." Back at the bus stop, a reporter had shown up. Then another. Karen saw the cameras and finally understood the size of it. She tried to say something to me as they closed the door. "Please," she said. Barely audible. I didn't answer. This wasn't personal anymore. It was public. A DA investigator read a final update from her phone records. Multiple calls, instructions, timelines. He looked up. They wanted this block cleared by summer. Parents reacted all at once. Summer, that meant now. My son finished his ride and came back running with his backpack bouncing. He hugged me tight. "Can we go home now?" I smiled and said, "Yeah, we can." As we walked away, the reporter asked, "Chief, any comment?" I stopped and gave one line. Calm and clear. "Tower hates daylight." Behind us, The unmarked cars pulled off in different directions. Warrants were being written. Phones were buzzing across the city. And somewhere downtown, people who thought this neighborhood was easy money were realizing something painful. They had pushed too far, and they had pushed the wrong family. By afternoon, the street didn't look like the same place anymore. News vans lined the curb where kids usually played. Neighbors who barely waved before were standing in groups, talking like they had known each other for years. Fear does that first, then relief follows. I took my son inside, made him a sandwich, and told him to do homework like it was a normal day. Kids heal faster when they feel normal. I changed my jacket, but I didn't change my phone settings. Everything stayed on record. Not even an hour later, my phone rang again. Private number. I answered. A calm male voice said my name like we were old friends. Chief, this has gone further than it needed to. I didn't reply. Silence makes people talk more. Mistakes were made, he continued. Karen acted on her own. I finally spoke. She didn't grab my kid on her own. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, we can make this right. That was the moment I knew exactly who I was talking to. I don't negotiate over kids, I said, and hung up. By evening, the DA had security emergency injunctions. No construction, no evictions, no HOA actions of any kind, until a full audit was done. The word spread fast. Some neighbors cried. One veteran down the block shook my hand and said, I thought I was alone. I told him, you never were. That line hit harder than I expected, because it was true for me too. The next day, Karen's face was everywhere. Mugshot, headlines, HOA, enforcer arrested after school bus incident. They tried softer words at first, then the details came out. Fake patrols, cash payments, false reports. Once people smelled corruption, they didn't let go. Old complaints surfaced, emails, messages, threats. Karen wasn't just loud, she was consistent, and that consistency buried her. Davenport Holdings released a statement saying they had no official relationship with her. That lasted about 6 hours. Then bank records leaked. Shell companies, consulting fees, same dates as the complaints, same amounts. The DA called me that night and said, you were right. This is organized. I told him, it always is when power feels rushed. A week later, the block had its first real HOA meeting in months. Open chairs. Open mix. No fines. No threats. Just people talking. Mr. Alvarez stood up and said, we failed by letting one person speak for all of us. Nobody argued. We voted on transparency rules. Video recordings. Shared access. The basics. Funny how simple things stop big problems. Karen tried to post bail. It was denied. Risk of flight. Risk of interference. The judge mentioned the child incident twice. Judges don't forget that part. Neither do juries. My son asked me one night, is she still mad? I thought for a second and said, she's not in charge anymore. He smiled and went back to his game. That was enough for him. Kids don't need revenge. They need safety. 2 months later, Davenport Holdings folded the project. Official reason, market conditions. Unofficial reason, everyone was watching them now. Regulators don't like surprises. Neither do voters. One morning, while walking my son to the bus stop, he stopped and looked around. It's quiet, he said. It was. No clipboards. No fake badges. Just parents and kids and a yellow bus. I nodded and said, that's what normal sounds like. A reporter later asked me if I regretted getting involved. I told her the truth. I didn't get involved. Someone brought it to my kid. She didn't ask another question after that. Karen eventually took a plea deal. No trial, no speeches. Just paperwork and years. She never looked at me in court. I didn't look at her either. The case wasn't about us anymore. It was about what happens when small power goes unchecked. The block still has problems. Every place does. But now, when someone knocks, it's a neighbor, not fear. And every morning, when the bus doors open, my son steps on smiling. That's the ending that mattered. Because freedom doesn't always look loud. Sometimes, it just looks peaceful again. You asked for twists until the end. So here's where everyone thought it was over. 3 months after Karen took the plea deal, I got called downtown. Not as chief, as a witness. The DA closed the door and slid a thin file across the table. You were right about one thing, he said. Karen wasn't the top. I didn't touch the file yet. He opened it himself. Photos, emails, meeting logs. One name circled in red. Councilman Eric Vaughn. I leaned back slowly. Vaughn had publicly condemned Karen, called her a rogue HOA bully. He even stood in front of cameras and praised the neighborhood for coming together. He shook my hand on live TV. Dada tapped the page. Davenport Holdings donated heavily to Vaughn's campaign. 2 weeks before the complaint started, there it was. The reason Karen acted fearless. She thought she had city protection. Dada continued. We believe the plan was simple. Push out vulnerable homeowners. Let values drop. Davenport buys cheap. Rezones land. Vaughn approves permits. Everyone profits. He paused. Except the families. I finally looked down at the file. One email stood out. Clear the resistance quietly. Avoid attention. Resistance. That's what they called my neighbors. I asked, does he know we're on to him? The DA's jaw tightened. He will. That same evening, Vaughn held a press conference. Calm smile. Perfect tie. I had no knowledge of illegal activity, he said smoothly. Reporters nodded. He sounded clean. Too clean. The next morning, Internal Affairs walked into my office. Not to thank me, to question me. Chief, one of them said carefully, there's been a complaint about conflict of interest. Claims you used your position to target a council member. I stared at him. So that was the move. Shift to spotlight. Taint me as the angry father who overreached. I stayed calm. Is this coming from Vaughn? Silence answered that. They review everything. Body cam footage, call logs, warrants. Every step had paperwork. Every move had witnesses. I knew it would hold. But that wasn't the point. The point was pressure. 2 days later, a black SUV followed my wife home from work. Not close enough to touch, just close enough to be noticed. She called me immediately. That was their mistake. Because this wasn't just politics anymore. It was intimidation. And intimidation leaves marks. We pulled traffic cameras. Plate numbers. Rental company tied to a shell firm. Same legal address used by Davenport's consulting arm. Dada didn't smile this time. He said one sentence I'll never forget. They just turned corruption into obstruction. Federal agents got involved quietly after that. Vaughn kept smiling in public. Until the morning they showed up at his office with a warrant. News broke fast. Campaign funds frozen. Emails seized. Phone records pulled. One message. Sent the night Karen grabbed my son. Sealed it. Make sure the bus stop issue sends a message. The bus stop issue. That's how small they thought it was. That afternoon, Vaughn was escorted out of City Hall. No cameras invited, but plenty showed up. A reporter caught me outside and asked, Chief, did you expect this to go this far? I looked straight into the lens and said, when you try to scare one family, you expose the whole machine. My son saw that clip later. He asked, are the bad people gone now? I thought carefully before answering. Some are. I said, the rest know we're watching. Months passed. The empty lot at the end of the street. It became a public park. City funded. Transparent vote. Community approved. No luxury towers. No secret rezoning. Just grass, benches, a playground. Opening day. My son ran straight to the swings. Neighbors laughed. Music played. Flags waved lightly in the wind. Mr. Alvarez stood beside me and said quietly, they thought we were weak. I shook my head. They thought we were alone. He smiled. And that was the final truth. Karen lost her power. Davenport lost their project. Vaughn lost his office. But the real win wasn't arrests. It wasn't headlines. It wasn't revenge. It was this. A child standing at a bus stop, without fear. And every parent around him knowing exactly who they are. Because here's the thing about power. It only works in the dark. And that morning at the bus stop, we turned on the light. The case closed quietly after that. No speeches. No victory laps. Just court dates, signatures, and doors shutting behind people who thought they were untouchable. Life on the block went back to small things, kids racing the bus, neighbors arguing about lawns instead of power. The park opened in spring. My son planted a tree there with his class. He named it Brave, because he said it stood where someone tried to scare him once. I stood back and watched, not as a chief, not as a symbol, just a dad. And every morning after that, when the bus doors opened and closed, nothing happened. No shouting, no threats, just normal. And sometimes, normal is the strongest ending there is.